My husband's family invited me to a family gathering, where they handed me a contract, claiming, "Sign this to transfer your savings to us." I laughed, until they locked the door behind me. But then I pulled out a document of my own, and suddenly, they all regretted what they'd just done. Let me backtrack a bit. I always knew my husband's family had some issues with money, but I never imagined they'd go this far. I've been married to Mark for a decade. Together, we've built a stable life, both working hard, making wise financial choices. I wasn't one to flaunt my wealth, but I had a healthy savings account, investments, and shared ownership in everything we had together. Mark and I had always kept our finances separate, but we contributed equally to our household. It felt like a solid arrangement. His family, on the other hand, was a disaster when it came to money. His parents, his older brother, his sister-in-law, and even his cousin, all of them had financial issues, credit cards maxed out, terrible investments, and personal loans they never repaid. Mark had assured me time and again that we would keep our finances away from theirs. I trusted him. Then came the meeting. Mark told me that his parents wanted to have a family meeting at their house. His dad supposedly had some important news and needed everyone present. I wasn't exactly thrilled about spending my Saturday with his family, but I agreed. I figured it would be the usual, some drama over money, a loan request, or complaints about their latest financial disaster. But I was wrong. When we arrived at his parents' house, something immediately felt off. The entire family was already there, seated in the living room as if waiting for something. Mark and I sat down, and his father, Richard, cleared his throat dramatically. "We've been discussing things," he started, scanning the room like he was about to make some big announcement, "and we've come up with a plan that will benefit everyone." I should have walked out right then. His mother, Carol, smiled at me like she was speaking to a child in need of persuasion. "We know you've been fortunate with your savings," she said. My stomach sank. I glanced at Mark, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "We've drawn up a contract," his brother Dan declared, pulling a thick stack of papers from a folder, "to make things fair." Dan stood up, handing me the document as if it were a great honor. I skimmed through the pages, and my blood ran cold. They were asking me to transfer all my personal savings into a family account, which Richard would manage. Their reasoning? Since I'd managed to build up my savings, it was only right that I share it so everyone could benefit. I actually laughed. I thought it was some kind of joke. "You can't be serious," I said, shaking my head. "Oh, we are," Richard replied calmly. Dan folded his arms. "It's time for everyone to pitch in. You're part of this family, and families support each other." I glanced at Mark again, but he still wouldn't look at me. "That's ridiculous," I said, tossing the papers back on the table. "There's no way I'm signing this." That's when Richard sighed dramatically, almost as though he was disappointed in me. Then, with unsettling calm, he stood, walked to the front door, and locked it. Carol, still smiling, said, "We were hoping you'd just sign it, but if you need some time to think it over, that's fine." Dan grabbed the contract and placed it back in my lap. "Take another look, carefully." I scanned the room. The entire family was watching me, waiting. And then I realized, Mark wasn't shocked by this. He knew they'd try this, and he hadn't said a word. That was when something inside me snapped. I slowly reached into my purse. The smug looks on their faces made them think I was going for a pen. Instead, I pulled out my own folder. I calmly unfolded the papers and set them down on the table. "What's this?" Richard frowned. I leaned back in my chair, unaffected. "Divorce papers." Mark's head shot up. "Wait, what?" I turned toward him, fully facing him now. "I knew something wasn't right when you insisted on separate finances all these years. I knew your family came first for you, but this?" I motioned at the contract. "This is the proof I needed." Mark's face turned red. "Babe, please, let's just talk about this." "No," I pointed at the papers in front of me. "You're signing these today." Carol's smile began to fade. "Now, just hold on." "No," I snapped. I came prepared. I turned back to Mark, keeping my voice steady. "I met with my lawyer 2 weeks ago. The house? It's in my name. The car? Also mine. The savings? You were never on the account. You don't have access to a single dime of my money." Richard's face turned purple. "You ungrateful." "Careful," I warned. "I also have a restraining order ready, in case anyone here tries to harass me after today." The room fell silent. Then Dan scoffed. You wouldn't actually go through with this. I pulled out my phone. I'll call my lawyer right now. Mark swallowed hard. Please, don't do this. I raised an eyebrow. Why, so you and your family can bleed me dry? So I can keep funding their poor decisions for the rest of my life? I gestured at the contract still sitting there. You thought I'd sign this? His mother began to cry. His father shook with rage. His brother looked like he wanted to punch something. But I didn't care. I was done, and I wasn't leaving without a fight. The tension in the room was thick. Mark's family sat frozen, staring at me like I'd just pulled a loaded weapon instead of divorce papers. Mark finally broke the silence. Babe, let's talk in private. I scoffed. Oh, now you want privacy? You had no issue cornering me in front of everyone else. You thought locking me in here would intimidate me into submission? I shook my head. No, we're doing this right here, right now. Carol wiped at her fake tears. You don't understand, dear. This is what families do, we share. I laughed bitterly. Funny, because in 10 years, not once has anyone in this room shared anything with me, except their problems. Richard clenched his jaw, his fists white-knuckled against the chair's armrests. You're making a huge mistake. If you walk out of that door, you won't be welcome here again. I smirked. Oh no, how will I ever survive? Dan sneered. You think you're so clever, don't you? But Mark won't sign anything. He's not that stupid. I turned to Mark, who was still eyeing the divorce papers like they were poisonous. You're signing them, I told him, because if you don't, you'll regret it more than you can imagine. His eyes widened in shock. Are you threatening me? I leaned in slightly. No, Mark, I'm warning you. His hands started shaking. What Mark and his family didn't know, what Mark didn't know, was that I had more than just divorce papers in that folder. I pulled out another set of documents and placed them on top of the divorce papers. What's this? Mark asked, his voice full of uncertainty. I smiled coldly. Oh, just evidence of your little side projects. His face drained of color. I turned to his family, speaking slowly. Would you all like to know how Mark has been siphoning money from your accounts over the years? Richard leaned forward, his eyes widening. What the hell are you talking about? I tapped the papers. Bank statements, transfers, fake investments. Mark has been skimming from all of you. Mark shot out of his seat. That's a lie. I crossed my arms. Is it? Because I have the proof, and if you want to challenge me, I'll be happy to take this to the authorities. Carol gasped, and Dan immediately grabbed the papers, scanning them with fury building in his eyes. No, no way, he wouldn't, but his gaze froze on a particular transaction. His fingers clenched the papers tightly. You liar. Mark stiffened instantly. Dan, listen, I can explain. But Dan was already up, fists clenched in anger. You took my money, my kids' money. You told me you were investing it for us. Hold on, Richard growled, snatching the papers from Dan's hands. His face darkened as he flicked through them. Is this why my loan got turned down? Because you drained the emergency fund? Carol burst into fresh tears. You told me you needed that money for our mortgage. Pandemonium broke out. Mark was scrambling to defend himself, but his family wasn't listening anymore. They were all shouting, accusations flying, rage boiling over. I stayed seated and watched it all unfold, because I already knew. I'd known for some time that Mark had been lying, not just to me, but to all of them. The suspicious money transfers, the stories that didn't add up, a little research, and I uncovered the truth. Mark had been stealing from his own family for years. And they hadn't known, until now. The yelling got louder, but I calmly stood and grabbed my purse. Mark turned to me, eyes pleading. You set me up. I tilted my head. Did I? Or did you do this to yourself? He lunged toward me, but before he could reach me, Dan shoved him back with enough force to send him stumbling. You're done, Dan snarled. We're taking you to the police. Mark looked around, frantic, realizing he was completely isolated. Mom. Dad, you can't do this to me. Carol, still crying, shook her head. You did this to yourself, Mark. I unlocked the door and stepped outside. Before I left, I looked back at him one last time. Oh, and Mark? He looked up, eyes wide with panic. I smiled. Consider this my contribution to the family. Then I walked out, leaving him to face the music. I walked away feeling lighter than I had in years, but I knew it wasn't over. Mark wouldn't give up without a fight. I headed straight to my lawyer's office to officially file for divorce. The quicker I cut ties with him, the better. As I parked, my phone buzzed with a barrage of messages from his family. "Carol, we need to talk. Call me now." "Dan, did you know about all of this?" "Richard, your lawyer? Seriously? You're making this worse." I ignored them, they weren't my problem anymore. But then an unknown number popped up. "Unknown, you think you've won." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I knew who it was. Mark. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to my lawyer and walked into his office to finalize everything. For the next few weeks, Mark tried to act like everything was fine. He refused to move out of our house, even though it was in my name. He tried to drain our joint bank account, but I had already moved my share. Worst of all, he began spreading a lie that I was the villain, claiming I had set him up with fake documents to ruin his life. His family almost believed him, at least at first. But then the investigation began. Dan wasn't bluffing when he said they'd press charges. The police started digging into Mark's accounts, and things got much worse for him. It turned out Mark wasn't just stealing from his family, he had multiple secret accounts. He'd taken out loans in his parents' names without their knowledge. He'd used his brother's identity for a credit card scam, and the worst part? He had been embezzling from his father's business. Once all of that came to light, his family completely turned on him. Richard was the first to act. He filed a lawsuit against Mark, demanding he repay every cent he'd taken. Dan followed suit, slamming him with fraud charges for the fake investments. Carol, who had initially defended Mark, finally snapped when she found out he'd taken out a second mortgage on their house behind their backs. The legal storm hit him hard. And me? I stood by, watching. Mark's last-ditch effort. I thought Mark would finally realize the mess he was in. I thought he'd go away quietly. I was wrong. One night, about a month after everything unfolded, I woke up to pounding on my front door. I checked the time, 2:47 a.m. A sinking feeling crawled into my stomach as I grabbed my phone. Then I heard it. "Open the door." "My name, I know you're in there." It was Mark. I didn't move, I didn't say a word, I just called the police. "You set me up," he screamed. "You took everything from me. Let me in, damn it." I remained silent. I just watched the security footage as the police arrived. When they pulled up, Mark tried to run, but he was too slow. They tackled him to the ground and arrested him on the spot. The next morning, I learned the reason for his midnight visit. His family had cut him off completely. No money, no house, no car. And his legal situation? Worse than ever. The final twist. I thought that was the end of it. But a week later, I got a call from my lawyer. He sounded amused. "You're going to love this," he said. "Mark had a secret account in your name." I almost dropped my coffee. What? Turns out, Mark had been funneling stolen money into an account under my name, likely planning to pin everything on me if he got caught. But he didn't cover his tracks well enough. So guess what happened? Since the account was in my name, I was legally entitled to all of it. Mark, he went straight to jail for fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. And me? I walked away with a huge payout. Mark thought he could ruin my life. He thought he could use me as a scapegoat for all his crimes. But instead, he ruined himself. After the discovery of the secret bank account, my lawyer acted quickly. Since the account was legally mine, I kept every penny. The money Mark had stolen from his family, the money from his father's business, the fake loans. It all went into that account. Over $300,000. And his family couldn't take it back, because Mark had used fake documents to open the account. It was legally mine. Dan, Richard, and Carol tried to contest it in court, claiming it belonged to them. But my lawyer shut them down. "Your son committed fraud," he told them. "If you want to press charges, go ahead," but my client had no part in his crimes. They had no case. So while Mark rotted in jail, I walked away with everything he'd stolen. Mark's trial was a disaster, for him. The evidence stacked against him was overwhelming. Even his own lawyer was embarrassed. The charges piled up: identity theft, fraud, embezzlement, grand larceny. By the end, the judge showed no mercy. Mark was sentenced to 7 years in prison. 7 long years. And since he couldn't afford a decent lawyer, he didn't get a cushy sentence. He went straight to a state prison. The last time I saw him was in court. He was a shell of the man he used to be, his hair unkempt, his face pale, his cocky demeanor gone. I walked past him, and he had the nerve to whisper, "Please, help me." I smiled. "You think I ruined your life?" I leaned in and whispered back, "You did this to yourself." Then I walked out, without a second glance. The best part? Remember that house he refused to move out of? I sold it, at a huge profit. And the car he thought he could take from me? Sold that too. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.